The first light of a September morning creeps over the horizon of the Atlantic, catching the white caps of the upper New York Bay before illuminating the jagged, wooden silhouette of a lonely outpost at the edge of a vast, unknown continent. To a modern eye, this tip of Manhattan is unrecognizable. There are no glass towers, no steel spans, and no roar of engines. Instead, there is the cry of a herring gull, the rhythmic slap of the tide against timber pilings, and the heavy, earthy scent of salt marsh, wood smoke, and curing animal hides. This is New Amsterdam in the mid-17th century, a tiny, precarious, and incredibly ambitious slice of the Dutch Republic transplanted into the American wilderness. As the sun climbs higher, the morning bell atop Fort Amsterdam begins to toll. This is the heartbeat of the settlement, a signal that the day's labor has officially begun. The fort itself, a star-shaped earthen structure located where the customs house stands today, is the center of gravity for the town's 1,500 residents. Inside its walls, the heavy wooden doors of the Director General's stone house creak open. Peter Stuyvesant, the man tasked with bringing order to this rowdy frontier port, steps out onto the parade ground. The rhythmic thud of his silver-banded wooden leg echoes against the stones, a sound that every person in the colony has learned to respect or fear. He looks toward the harbor, scanning the horizon for the distinctive sails of a Dutch West India Company vessel, the lifeline that connects this muddy outpost to the counting houses of Amsterdam. Down by the water's edge, the town is already waking up, in a chorus of clattering shutters and barking dogs. The streets are not the paved avenues of the future, but winding, rutted paths of dirt and oyster shells. Pigs, the unofficial sanitation department of New Amsterdam, wander freely, rooting through the refuse in the gutters. On the Herengracht, a canal cut into the center of the town to mimic the waterways of the Netherlands, the water is dark and brackish. Small, flat-bottomed boats are already moving through the canal, ferrying barrels of beer and crates of dry goods from the docks to the warehouses that line the banks. At the Great Dock, the morning air is thick with the smell of the sea. Sailors from a dozen different nations are hauling thick hemp ropes, their voices a polyglot tangle of Dutch, English, French, Portuguese, and German. New Amsterdam is already a melting pot. It is said that 18 different languages can be heard on these streets. A group of sailors, their faces weathered by months at sea, lean over the rail of a flute ship, watching as a crane hoists heavy hogsheads of tobacco from the hold. This tobacco, grown in the fields of Virginia and Maryland, has been smuggled or traded here to be shipped back to Europe, bypassing English taxes. Nearby, a group of merchants in heavy wool coats and wide-brimmed hats gather to discuss the morning's prices. They are not trading in gold or silver, which are scarce here. Instead, their pockets are filled with suint, the purple and white shell beads known as wampum. In New Amsterdam, this indigenous currency is the lifeblood of the economy. They argue over the exchange rate of beaver pelts, the brown gold of the New World. A single, high-quality pelt can buy a man a winter's worth of grain. And the hunger for these furs is what drives the colony's expansion deeper into the Hudson Valley. By mid-morning, the market square near the fort is a hive of activity. Farmers from the outlying boweries, the Dutch word for farms, have arrived in their wagons, bringing fresh cabbages, pumpkins, and crates of squawking chickens. Among the crowds, you see the distinctive silhouettes of the Lenape people, the original inhabitants of this land. They have traveled down the island's main trail, a path that will one day be known as Broadway, to trade their furs and hand-woven baskets for iron kettles, knives, and bright wool cloth. The interaction is wary but necessary. The prosperity of the town depends on the uneasy peace maintained between the Dutch West India Company and the surrounding tribes. Behind the counters of the small, brick-fronted shops, the women of New Amsterdam are proving to be the backbone of the settlement's commerce. Under Dutch law, women enjoy legal rights far beyond those of their English neighbors. They can own property, inherit businesses, and sue in court. You might see a woman like Margaret Phillips, a sharp-witted trader, negotiating the sale of a shipment of linseed oil, or managing the accounts of her husband's shipping firm. These women are not merely housewives. They are she-merchants, as the English will later call them, driving the town's economy with a fierce, pragmatic energy. As the sun reaches its zenith, the town's focus shifts to the Stadthaus, the city hall, which sits at the water's edge looking out over the East River. This gabled stone building is the site of constant legal drama. The Dutch are a litigious people, and the court records of New Amsterdam are filled with suits over unpaid debts, slanderous insults yelled over garden fences, and disputes over wandering livestock. Inside, the burgomasters and schepens, the local magistrates, sit in heavy oak chairs, listening to a blacksmith complain that a neighbor's chimney is a fire hazard. Fire is the great terror of this wooden town, and Stuyvesant has appointed chimney sweeps to inspect every hearth, imposing heavy fines on those who allow soot to build up. The sounds of industry are everywhere. On the western edge of the island, the great windmills are turning in the breeze, their massive wooden gears groaning as they grind corn and wheat into flour. The rhythmic thwack of an adze against timber comes from the shipyard, where shipwrights are repairing a damaged hull. In the smithies, the roar of the bellows and the ring of hammer on anvil signal the creation of the nails, hinges, and horseshoes that hold the colony together. Lunchtime brings a temporary lull to the labor, as men and women duck into the numerous taverns that dot the streets. In New Amsterdam, beer is safer to drink than the water from the shallow, often contaminated wells. The taverns are the social heart of the town, filled with the smell of roasting pork and the thick, sweet haze of pipe tobacco. Men sit on long wooden benches, clutching pewter mugs of small beer, discussing the latest news from the fatherland. Is the Republic still at war with the English? Has the West India Company declared a dividend? The tension of living on the edge of a vast wilderness is balanced by the familiar comforts of Dutch life. The blue and white tiles on the hearth, the heavy pewter plates, and the sturdy, dependable furniture imported from Amsterdam. In the early afternoon, a group of soldiers in buff-colored leather jerkins and iron breastplates marches out of the fort. They are headed toward the northern edge of the town, where a massive wooden palisade has been constructed. This wall, built of 12-foot-high sharpened logs, stretches from the Hudson to the East River. It was built to protect the town from attacks by the English or the indigenous tribes, though it mostly serves to keep the town's cattle from wandering off into the woods. The path that runs alongside this fortification is already known as the Chingle, but in the centuries to come, the world will know it as Wall Street. The soldiers check the gates and scan the dense forests to the north, where the wilderness begins in earnest. Beyond the wall, Manhattan is a place of ancient oaks, rushing streams, and wolves that howl in the night. Further up the island, beyond the wall, the landscape opens into the Boweries. Here, enslaved Africans are working the soil. The Dutch West India Company brought the first enslaved people to New Amsterdam in 1626, and their labor is essential to the colony's survival. They clear the land, build the roads, and harvest the crops. However, the status of enslaved people in New Amsterdam is complex and shifting. Some have been granted half freedom, allowed to own land and pay a tribute to the company in exchange for their liberty, creating a small community of free black farmers in the area that will one day become Greenwich Village. Their presence is a reminder of the global reach of the Dutch Empire and the human cost of its expansion. As the afternoon shadows lengthen, the harbor becomes even busier. A small ferry, little more than a rowboat with a sail, makes its way across the treacherous currents of the East River to the tiny village of Breukelen on Long Island. On the shoreline, children play with wooden hoops and marbles in the dirt, their shouts echoing in the narrow alleys. They are a new generation, born in the new world, for whom the canals of Amsterdam are merely a story told by their grandparents. They speak a hybrid tongue, mixing Dutch words with the names of local plants and animals learned from the Lenape. By late afternoon, the Rattle Watch, the town's first police force, begins to prepare for the night. These men, carrying large wooden rattles to signal their presence and ward off intruders, gather at the fort to receive their orders. Their job is to patrol the streets, watch for fires, and ensure that the various taverns close on time. Stuyvesant has a low tolerance for public drunkenness and brawling, though his edicts are often ignored by the sailors and soldiers who frequent the waterfront dives. The golden hour of evening transforms the town. The red brick facades of the houses, many built with bricks brought over as ballast in Dutch ships, glow in the setting sun. The crow-stepped gables, a signature of Dutch architecture, create a jagged, familiar skyline against the darkening sky. Families gather on their stoops, the raised front porches that are a uniquely Dutch contribution to American life. They watch the world go by, greeting neighbors and exchanging the day's gossip. There is a sense of hard-won stability here, a feeling that, despite the distance from Europe and the constant threats of the frontier, a real society has taken root. As the sun dips below the horizon, the gates of the wall are heaved shut and locked. The ferry stops its crossings, and the ships in the harbor bob silently in the dark water, their lanterns casting long, shimmering reflections. Inside the houses, the heavy shutters are bolted. The only light comes from the flickering flames of tallow candles and the red glow of the hearth. The evening meal is often a simple affair, a thick porridge called soupon, made from cornmeal and milk, or a stew of salted fish and root vegetables. In the Director General's house, Stuyvesant sits at his desk, dipping a quill into an inkwell. He is writing a report to his superiors in the Netherlands, complaining about the lack of funding, the rowdiness of the settlers, and the constant encroachment of the English to the north and south. He knows that his colony is a small prize in a much larger game of empires. He writes of the need for more soldiers, more supplies, and more godly settlers to turn this trading post into a permanent bastion of Dutch power. Outside, the Rattle Watch begins its rounds. The rhythmic clack, clack, clack of their wooden rattles sounds at the corner of every street, a reassuring signal to the sleeping residents that all is well. But the night is never truly silent. From the woods beyond the wall comes the cry of a screech owl, or the distant snap of a branch. In the taverns that have managed to stay open past the curfew, the low murmur of voices and the clink of glass continue behind heavy curtains. The air turns cold as the dampness of the surrounding water settles over the island. The smell of the town shifts. The salt spray of the afternoon is replaced by the heavy, sweet scent of wood smoke from 1,000 chimneys. In the slave quarters and the servants' lofts, in the merchants' mansions and the soldiers' barracks, the people of New Amsterdam drift into sleep. They are a people caught between worlds, no longer fully European, but not yet something entirely new. They are the inhabitants of a town that shouldn't exist, a Dutch dream built on a thin strip of land between the river and the sea. As midnight approaches, the moon rises over the East River, illuminating the masts of the ships in the harbor like a forest of skeletal trees. The fort stands as a dark, silent sentinel at the tip of the island. For now, the flag of the Prince of Orange flies over this land. For now, the laws of the States General are the law of the land. But the forces that will transform this outpost into a global metropolis are already in motion. The diversity, the commerce, the legal squabbles, and the relentless drive for profit that define this day in the 1600s are the very seeds of the city that will one day never sleep. The last candle in the Stadthaus is extinguished. The Rattle Watchman pauses at the water's edge, looking out toward the dark silhouette of Nutten Island, which will one day be called Governor's Island. He hears the water lapping against the stones and the distant, lonely sound of a ship's bell out in the bay. He turns and continues his walk, his heavy boots crunching on the oyster shells. The day in New Amsterdam has ended, disappearing into the mists of the Hudson, leaving behind only the echoes of a world that was and the foundations of a world that was yet to be. The darkness is absolute in a way no modern New Yorker could imagine. Without the glow of electricity, the stars are brilliant and terrifyingly close. A vast canopy of light over a town that feels like a tiny, fragile raft on a dark sea. The forest to the north is a wall of blackness, a reminder that for all their brick houses and legal codes, the settlers are still guests on a continent that does not yet know their names. But as the deep silence of the small hours takes hold, the town breathes. It breathes in the rhythm of the tides, in the slow cooling of the brick walls, and in the dreams of the 1,500 souls who have staked their lives on this rocky point of land. They dream of profit, of freedom, of home, and of the unknown tomorrow. The morning will bring the bell again, the thud of Stuyvesant's leg, the smell of the market, and the endless, driving energy of trade. But for now, New Amsterdam rests, a quiet, Dutch-speaking village at the end of the world, waiting for the sun to rise once more over the Atlantic. The transition from the 1600s to the future is invisible to those sleeping in their beds. They do not know that the wall they built will become the financial center of the world. They do not know that the muddy path they call the Herenweg will become Broadway, a canyon of light and theater. They only know the mud, the beaver pelts, the taste of small beer, and the cold wind off the water. And in that simple, gritty reality, the story of New York has already begun. As the first hint of gray light begins to touch the eastern sky over Long Island, the cycle prepares to repeat. The rattle watch prepares to retire, the fires in the bakeries are being stoked, and the first sailors begin to stir on the ships in the harbor. The 17th century is a time of brutal hardship and immense opportunity, a time when a person could reinvent themselves in the shadow of a fort at the edge of the world. The day is coming, the bell is about to ring, and New Amsterdam is ready to wake up and get to work once more. The air begins to stir with the morning breeze, carrying the scent of the pine forests from the north and the salt of the sea from the south. The town silhouette sharpens against the dawn. The gables, the windmills, the masts, and the fort emerge from the gloom. It is a place of contradictions, a company town that values individual rights, a religious outpost that tolerates a dozen faiths, and a fortress that is primarily a marketplace. It is New Amsterdam, and its day is just beginning. A day that will stretch across centuries, evolving, growing, and eventually becoming the roar of the greatest city on earth. But for this moment, in the quiet light of the 1600s, it is just a small town on a beautiful wooded island. The birds begin their morning chorus in the marshes. The water of the canal reflects the pink and gold of the sky. A single door creaks open, a bucket of water is tossed onto the street, and the first voice of the day calls out a greeting in Dutch. The history of this place is written in the dirt of its streets and the ambition of its people. A story that continues with every rising sun. The morning bell tolls. The sound ripples across the water, reaching the ears of the Lenape in their camps, the farmers in their boweries, and the sailors on the bay. It is a summons to life, to labor, and to the endless pursuit of something better. The 17th century is a harsh master. But in New Amsterdam, it is met with a stubborn, pragmatic grace. As the sun clears the horizon, the town is fully revealed. A tiny, vibrant, messy, and magnificent experiment in the middle of the new world. And so, the day begins again, in a city that is already, in its heart, the center of the universe.
If you liked this video, please hit the like and subscribe button for more.